Tired of showing up to gatherings with ho-hum grocery store bottles? Here's a secret. Some of the best wines by top independent producers aren't sitting on those shelves, but unless you know where to look, you'll probably never find them. That's where Sommsation comes in. Their team of top-tier sommeliers curates exceptional, high-quality wines that'll make you the hero of your next dinner party. From perfectly chosen bottles to wine club memberships and even private tastings, Sommsation makes it simple to elevate every occasion. Don't settle for ordinary wine. You deserve better. Discover more at sommsation.com/wine enthusiast.
Welcome to the Wine Enthusiast podcast, your serving of drinks culture and the people who drive it. I'm Ryan Grimm, magazine director here at Wine Enthusiast. So it's a big month here at the magazine. We just put out our annual Top 100 Best Buys list. Our reviewers taste 25,000 bottles a year, and these were their favorites that you can buy for $20 or less. And almost all of them scored 90 points or higher. I love this list because it's so eye-opening for people who mistakenly think that they can't afford a good bottle of wine. One thing that stuck out to me about this year's list was that there were 8 bottles from Oregon alone. That's a lot for a list of wines that come from all over the world. And it made me wonder what's going on in Oregon that produced so many top-scoring Best Buy bottles. So I got in touch with Michael Alberty, who reviews Oregon wines for us, knowing he'd be the best person to shed some light on this. Michael, thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be here.
Were you surprised that so many wines from Oregon made our Best Buys list?
Yes and no. First of all, it was great to see that nearly 10% of the list is from Oregon. That's great. It didn't surprise me that much because over the last year, as bottles have been coming in for review, I've been noticing more and more Oregon wines of various grape varieties that sell for less than $20 that end up getting pretty decent scores. And that's more than I've noticed in years previously by a long shot. It used to be, 20, 30 years ago in Oregon, it was almost impossible to find particularly a Pinot Noir that was under $20 that you might want to actually drink. And that kind of changed in 1992 when Firesteed Winery started up with a gentleman named Howard Rossback. And he decided he was going to start making some Oregon Pinot Noir that would sell for significantly less than $20 that was made with intention. And by that, when I talked to him the other day, he was talking about how we farmed it with intention, we farm properly, we make the wine with intention to make a wine that is like $16 to $18 a bottle. And he said too many of the wines in those days were what they call cast-offs, meaning that they were wines that didn't make it into the winery's premium blends, and so it was just kind of a ragtag cast-off collection of juice put into a bottle and sold at a low price. And he wanted to correct that and start making Firesteed wines that fit the category of under $20 and good quality. And, full circle for Howard, he's got a brand new label out because he owns a winery called Citation Wines, and he owns a vineyard in the Willamette Valley called Erratic Oaks Vineyard. But he's got this new label out called Willajory, and it's 3 different wines, Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, and Chardonnay. And all of them sell for $20 and less. And he's using the same formula. And so I asked him, I said, how are you? Because I'd always thought it was almost impossible to make a wine that tasted this good that was under $20. So I just asked him, what are you doing? And what are these other wineries doing that are making these wines so good, but still at a price that's under $20? And so there were a couple of themes that developed in this conversation. One was that more people are actually looking to do it now. And I think part of that is because people are trying to hit that 21 to 35-year-old age demographic where, sure, there's some lifestyle issues at play, some health issues at play, people drinking a little bit less in that age group for various reasons. But one of the reasons that can't be ignored is, and there's some recent articles about this, about some of these people in the 21 to 35-year-old age group just don't have the capital or the commercial resources to be buying $40 and $50 bottles of Willamette Valley Pinot Noir. So I think more wineries are making a conscious effort to address that issue. And the other thing is that we've got, and this is not an Oregon problem exclusively, it's a California problem, it's a Washington problem, is that we've got flattening demand for wine sales, but we have an abundance of vineyards. And I don't think anybody in the state of Oregon would disagree that at the moment we have too many grapevines planted. There's just not enough demand to meet how many vines are planted. And so that provides people with a lot of opportunities to buy fruit at a per ton cost that in the past would have maybe been unheard of. And so you've got less expensive per ton fruit. So if people want to make those wines and have them come in at under $20 a bottle, they can do that more easily now. I heard one winemaker tell me that at the moment that they thought that there was like 1 million liters of bulk Pinot Noir juice out there floating around to be tapped into. And that to me gives an indication of, how much juice and how many grapes are out there for people that want to make less expensive wines or to take a stab at it, whether that means creating a new label or adding a new line to your current existing portfolio. I've seen both things happening. The other thing too is that people are more able to cut costs now. I think the days of exclusively handpicked fruit in Oregon is gone. We're seeing more and more mechanized farming to cut labor costs in particular.
Do you feel like for the consumer, do they care about that when they read about a producer who's picking by hand? Is that something that the average drinker really cares about?
I don't think so when we're talking about these bargain buys that are $20 and less. I think people are looking for, I want a bottle of wine that I can pop open at home on a Tuesday night and share with my family with a home cooked meal. And it's not a special occasion. It's just a very kind of European thing of I'm having a glass of wine with dinner tonight. And that can't, unless you're wealthy, that can't be a 40 to 50 to 60 or higher dollar bottle of wine every night. So I don't know that anybody purchasing a wine to drink with pizza on Tuesday night at home is going to be overly concerned about whether it was picked by hand or whether it was picked by a mechanized system. But even beyond that, there's other techniques too. So instead of having, like one winemaker told me, instead of having 3 people doing pump overs or stomping grapes with traditional pigeage, methods or whatever, a lot of time and labor could be cut by using, mechanized techniques instead of pump overs like pulsar with forced bubbles to stir up the cap. So there's all sorts of techniques like that that are now at the disposal of wineries in Oregon that they're using them to bring their costs down on making those wines. And that's one of the things that makes some of these best buy wines possible. Not all of them, some of them. I was heartened to see on that list a group of winemakers that have been making wines for a while in Oregon, and they've been making them with intention, for the most part, using grapes that they grow themselves, and yet they're still able to make these really decent, good quality wines for under $20 a bottle. So, I think that's a great thing, and there's a need for that, and there's a market for that. And so I think that's why we're seeing this surge of late of wines like that.
So if there are too many vineyards in the state, what does the future hold? What does 5-10 years look like in Oregon if we have a glut of supply?
Well, there's short-term and long-term answers to that. I think that in the short term, you are seeing some vineyard owners that are surviving right now by selling the grapes for a lower cost and just getting some sales just to survive in the short term. We've got a thing called the Oregon Winery and Vineyards Report that comes out every year that's done by researchers at the University of Oregon for the Oregon Wine Board. And they've been kind of tracking this trend over the last 5 to 6 years that shows that all of a sudden there's this jump in the amount of fruit that's being grown in Oregon, and yet it's being trucked to another state to be finished and made into wine in places like Santa Rosa, California. It's mostly California, a little bit to Washington, a little bit to Idaho, but that amount of fruit is staggering now. It ranges somewhere each year now between 26 and 31%. That's 26 to 31% of all the grapes produced in Oregon being shipped out of state to be made into wine in another state. So those are sales that that's great because the people that own those vineyards, if people in Oregon aren't able to buy all of that fruit, being able to sell it to just anyone is a lifesaver, and it's for economic survival for some of these vineyards. So that's the short run. The short run is we're seeing, people are trying to sell the fruit wherever they can to make it. Over the long haul, do we become like California and to some extent Washington, where you start seeing vineyards being ripped out? I think that we're already starting to see that a little bit, But I think that there's got to be a shakeout of some kind. So either demand needs to come back up, however that's going to happen, I have no clue, or we just need to have a market shakeout with less vineyards planted. I don't see what the other options are going to be. But in the short run, people are making sales. They're making sales to survive right now. 10 years from now, what that's going to look like.
So given all that, how has the industry's in the state's perception of itself changed since its rise to popularity, 20, 30 years ago?
I think the state is still unabashedly proud of what's been accomplished. And, for a region like the state of Oregon, if you just look at the state of Oregon, I mean, the total production in terms of what's the amount of wine made in the entire world, Oregon's making just a infinitesimal little amount of wine. And yet wineries in Oregon get some serious global attention for the quality of the wines that are being made now. So the recognition of the quality and all the kudos that come along with that from all the various publications and whatnot is so out of proportion to the amount of wine that we actually make. So people are very aware of that still and are still proud to be out there and marketing the wines for the quality of the wines. But that's the tension that's occurring now. Is one winemaker told me we've over premiumized the situation where we've got too many wines that are in the 50, 60, 75 and higher range, and not enough options in the middle range and the lower range. And that's how one winemaker described it to me, the over premiumization of the wine industry. I don't know that that's necessarily 100% accurate. I think there's always going to be a market demand for those $50, $60, $75 bottles of high quality wines, particularly Willamette Valley Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. The question is going to be, how do you market and how do you sell the wines that are in that, $15 to $25 and $34 range. And I think we're seeing more success in that area because there's a demand for wines in that price range.
Does the average producer in the state, do you feel, want to scale up and up and up and kind of growth's sake, or are they, kind of happy with the way things are for a lot of them?
It depends on who you talk to. There's a lot of people that, as you might imagine, given the flattening of demand, that are kind of like keeping their head down, focusing on what they're doing right now, trying to make the best quality wines possible with the vineyard sources that they have. I don't see a lot of people out there eagerly looking to expand necessarily in terms of planting more vineyards. But I mean, I saw an interesting thing happen with Stoller Winery recently. They have a portfolio of wines, including Chehalem wines, but most people know them for the Stoller family under that portfolio. But they were able to purchase Elawan wines from Copper Cane in California, and that increased their portfolio size by almost double. They almost doubled their production once they take over those wines and start making them in Oregon. But they were able to do that and increase production to the level they wanted to get to without changing the nature of any of the other wineries within their portfolio. So they didn't need to like super expand Stoller. They didn't need to super expand Chehalem Winery, but they added on that Elawan brand to give them some more nationwide distribution and to get their foot in their door into some places where they hadn't been in the past, and also get that increased production. So there's always exceptions to that. But in general, I think people are kind of standing pat to where they are in terms of the wines they're making and the amount of vineyards they have and stuff like that.
So two of the regions on the list were Rogue Valley and Willamette. And I think that a lot of people are familiar with Willamette. In addition to Rogue Valley, what are some other regions that people should be looking for, not just for value, but as kind of an entry point into Oregon wine?
Yeah, well, the Rogue Valley, I love the fact that there was a wine from Forest on that list, because the people at Forest, I mean, they've been around forever, and they make so many wines that are under $20 a bottle. And for the most part, every one of them I've come across lately have been really, really good. So you've got Forest working in the Rogue Valley, but I think those neighboring valleys around there too, like Applegate and Umpqua Valley, you can find any number of what we would call, quote, Best Buy wines in those regions. So Southern Oregon as a whole, I think, is a really great place to look. Like you've got Oregon Territory, which also has a Tempranillo on the list, and you've got, Scott Kelly and Dyson Damara at Oregon Territory, and that's in their address. They're based in Roseburg in Southern Oregon, and they're making some extraordinarily good wines for that price range. So in addition to Rogue Valley, I would look at Applegate Valley and Umpqua Valley down there. If you wanted to move up a little further north, I would look at an AVA that's called Elkton, the Elkton AVA. Some great opportunities there with wineries like Brandborg and River's Edge Winery, but you can find some great options there. There's a company there called Elkton Wine Company that has a wine called Crew Works that some really great values there. But within the Willamette Valley, this is kind of a southern theme. So you've got Southern Oregon, but then within the Willamette Valley, if you go to the very southern part of the Willamette Valley, there's an area that for too long was, ignored because it was a little bit of a drive south. So it's an area just north of Eugene, Oregon. So it's about a 90-minute drive from Portland to get down to what's now called the Lower Long Tom AVA. And that Lower Long Tom AVA, which is just a fun AVA name to say out loud, there's some great opportunities there. Wineries like, let's say, Brigadoon and High Pass wineries in that neck of the woods. Great wines and at very reasonable prices.
And how are these wines different than wines from the Willamette Valley? I feel like a lot of people who know Oregon wine but don't live in the state or even don't live in the U.S., they might kind of lump a lot of Oregon wines together. How are some of these regions different than some of the more well-known wines from Willamette?
Well, I mean, I think people have a perception of Southern Oregon being a warmer climate in general than the Willamette Valley. And yes and no. Yep. It just depends on what pockets you're in. So like, for instance, if I'm in that Elkton AVA, it's hard to lump that together with the rest of, quote, Southern Oregon because they've got this little cut in the mountains that allows a maritime air influence to work its way back inland. So they get warmer days, but they also get really, really cool nights. And that makes a huge difference. So you've got that big diurnal swing. So sort of like you see in the Willamette Valley and the Van Duzer corridor, for instance. But then you've also got parts of Southern Oregon that are really high elevation. And I think people may not be really aware of the fact that there's spots in Southern Oregon that are 1,500, 2,000 and higher in terms of elevation above sea level. And so you get the benefit of those, some of those warmer days and sunlight exposure, but then you get those cooler nights as well. So it would be a mistake to lump all of Southern Oregon together and think of it as it's just all warm and hot and there's no rain. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. So that's one of the reasons that makes Southern Oregon so exciting is that there's different pockets of microclimates where you get these dramatically different styles of wine. Sometimes where you can get high acidity, bright fruit, and then in other areas you get these big dark bold flavors and you're dealing with like Syrah and Zinfandel and stuff like that.
Well, I was going to ask, a lot of people, think about Oregon wine. They're thinking of Pinot, thinking of Chardonnay. What are some of the more like unsung varieties in the state that maybe people should get into more?
There is a groundswell of excitement, and I don't know what's causing it. I mean, I love the grapes. So Chenin Blanc. I know that there was a wine enthusiast, the Little Black Dress article recently about the surge in interest in Chenin Blanc. But that interest is really high in Oregon right now. The other day I put out a call because we don't really know how much Chenin Blanc's planted in the state of Oregon. I'm guessing it's around 100 acres for the entire state. I'm guessing it's right around there. But we didn't know because the vineyard reports we get kind of lump all those grapes together into one class of other white wines. So I put out the word through social media saying, hey, if you have Chenin Blanc planted and you're using it to make commercial wine, give me a holler. Tell me the vineyard name and tell me how many acres you have planted. I just got like a lot of emails telling me about 0.5 acres planted here, a couple acres planted here. Places that I didn't even know Chenin Blanc was planted, particularly like in Southern Oregon at high elevation. So you've got this image of Chenin Blanc being like this Loire Valley elegant grape, and you don't really think of it being planted in places like Southern Oregon. Willamette Valley, sure, maybe, but Southern Oregon. So Chenin Blanc, Gamay Noir, Grenache, and Cabernet Franc have, for the last 5 or 6 years, been grapes of particular interest. It used to be that you just had to like try to convince people to plant more Gamay Noir because there just wasn't enough Gamay Noir to go around. So those kind of grapes, you're seeing a whole lot of interest in. And then in Southern Oregon, Tempranillo, thanks to the pioneering efforts of wineries like Avicela to plant Tempranillo, now you're seeing some really great examples of Tempranillo. In fact, one of them is on the list, the Oregon Territory wine. The Oregon Territory
Oh yeah.
Tempranillo is on the Best Buys list for, significantly under, well, like right around $20 or $18 a bottle.
And how is an Oregon Chenin Blanc different than a Loire Valley Chenin Blanc?
It depends on where it's being grown, but I find that I don't get lanolin notes so much in Oregon. I don't get as much honeycomb kind of notes. But the Chenin Blancs that I've been drinking recently from the Willamette Valley have had similar levels of really bright acidity and orchard fruit, sometimes Granny Smith apples, that kind of stuff. So in the Willamette Valley, I see a lot of similarities to the Loire Valley. And if you get it planted into high enough elevation in Southern Oregon, it's the same thing. Maybe a little bit more fruit forward than Chenin Blancs from other parts of the world, but you can definitely recognize it as Chenin Blanc when you smell it and taste it. So, I mean, that may be part of what the interest is. I don't know, but it seems to be surging. Maybe if people tear out some other crate, maybe they'll plant more Chenin Blanc. We'll see.
And as for Tempranillo, are there higher end Tempranillos coming out of Oregon, or are those mostly value wines?
No, there's plenty of high end Tempranillos. You just have to look at Abicela's portfolio. There's some really good age-worthy wines being made with that grape in Southern Oregon. So you see a wide variety. You see wines like the Oregon Territory, which are kind of a really good value Tempranillo, but you can get up into the $40, $45, $50 range for Tempranillo, no problem.
Yeah. Of the, more kind of value focused producers in the state, either one that made the Best Buys list or otherwise, what's one or two that you really feel are just doing everything right and keeping a low price point, but just for someone who might not be familiar with some of the wines from the state, but they don't have a high budget, who should they look for?
Well, I'm going to go back to Forest in Rogue Valley. I mean, even within Oregon, I mean, they've been here for so long, but even in the state of Oregon, since they've been around so long, maybe they don't get the attention all the time that they deserve for those wines. But they have a range of wines that are under $20 that usually the quality on them is like, you sit there to go, how did they do this for this money? The wine that they've got on the list, the Flyover White, which I think is like an early Muscat Riesling blend, is just a really, really nice white wine. They make a Pinot Noir with fruit from Southern Oregon called Six Stones that's under $20 a bottle that I thought was really, really, really good. It just came through for review a couple of months ago, and I sat there and thought, wow, that is a really good one for that price point. So I would look at Forest, and then I'm going to double back because it's brand new, and so it may not have the attention. I think they're being distributed in like 30 states now, but they literally just started. So it's that Willajory, Willa, Jory, like the soil, and Jory. The Willajory label with those three wines is outstanding, and those are $20 and under. So I would try to find those if I was looking for wines to, buy for gatherings, social gatherings, put together a mixed case, whatever. Those are two wineries I would really look at.
And which region was Willajory?
Well, the Willajory is using fruit from Howard Rosbach's Erratic Oaks Vineyard, which is down in another new AVA called Mount Pisgah. So it's a Willamette Valley vineyard. So you're looking at 3 Willamette Valley wines for $20 and under that are made with intention and using single vineyard fruit that Howard Rosbach has coming out of Erratic Oaks. And as he pointed out to me the other day, he said, I sell fruit to some wineries. So he goes, I'm selling Erratic Oaks vineyard fruit to some other wineries that are making $40 and $45 bottles of wine with the exact same fruit that we're using to make the Willajory wine. So that's a great value.
I feel like when a lot of people, especially when people are first getting into wine, they have this misconception that the more they spend, the better bottle they're going to get. What would you say in regards, not just Oregon wine, but in general, about why that's not necessarily true?
I think that, yeah, it's hard with generalities. I think that you can spend more money. Okay, I'll use an example. Once again, I just happened to be having a conversation the other day with, like I said, Howard Rosbach. Howard said, "This isn't my first rodeo. I know how to get costs down, and we do all the farming ourselves." He goes, "So let's say that you farm a little bit more tons per acre than other people are doing that for the quote high quality premium wines. We can remember the days where people were like, oh, to get a quality wine, you have to farm 1 or 1.5 acres per ton. So Howard's like, well, what if you did 2.5 acres per ton? Maybe you don't get that same dark fruit and complexity for Pinot Noir that you might at a lower tons per acre, but you get a lot of red fruit like raspberries and strawberries, bright fruit. And it's really perfect for the kind of wine you're trying to make if you're trying to make a Pinot Noir that sells for less than $20. And he said, just think of it as if this were Burgundy, these wines that we're trying to make for under $20 are like Bourgogne Rouge or Bourgogne Village. Not trying to make a premier cru, not trying to make a Grand Cru wine, but we're trying to make a very nice Bourgogne Rouge wine. Call it entry level, call it whatever you want. So I think that, yeah, you can spend more money in Oregon and get a higher quality or a higher experience with more complex wines, better wines. You can pay $30, $40, $50, $60. At what point do you get to where you can say to yourself, gosh, the value I'm getting out of this, I'm not going beyond $80 or $100 for a wine like this. I don't know if that's up to an individual, but yeah, you can definitely come to Oregon. You can definitely spend 125, 150, upwards of even $300 a bottle for a Willamette Valley Pinot Noir, if that's what you want to do. I leave it up to individuals to decide whether, the value you're getting out of the $300 bottle of Pinot Noir is the value you want, but all those options are there.
Earlier on in the conversation, you mentioned kind of younger generations and maybe not having the disposable income to be spending on wine. I guess what does the industry in your mind look like 10, 15, even 20 years from now in terms of some of the changes we're seeing in the past few years and younger generations, just like economic shifts? Like, how does that affect, I guess, mostly Oregon, but just the American industry in general?
Yeah, I don't want to be gloom and doom, but I'm concerned that not every winery that I love to drink wines from is going to be around in 10 years or 15 years. That concerns me. But it's part of the economic situation that we're facing with depressed demand. There are other options out there with people spending a lot of money for advertising for drinks that are infused with CBD and THC, or just people using THC in forms of cannabis or whatever, non-alcoholic beverages. There's a wide variety of options out there for people to drink other than, wine that has alcohol in it. So I think that the first part of the prong is going to be wineries in Oregon and elsewhere are going to have to address, how do we make people once again think of wine as being part of their day-to-day lifestyle? How do we emphasize the fact that for thousands of years, people have sat down at their dinner tables and shared wine with friends and family and with food? And I think that food component is going to be a big part of it. So instead of having advertisements that show people just slugging down a glass of wine, standing out in the vineyard somewhere, maybe you start seeing ads where people are sitting around a table outdoors with food and sharing it over the course of a meal, as opposed to just drinking in a glamorous spot, shots, those kind of things. So I think the lifestyle and health aspect of it has to be addressed to combat what's out there in terms of temperance movement kind of stuff. I think people need to you don't have to stop making $50 or $65 bottles of Pinot Noir. There's people out there that if the wine is good, they'll buy that wine. But you might want to entertain the notion of having a wine that's in that $20 range as another option for your customers, whether that's an entry level wine to get them to see what you're all about, maybe the first exposure to your winery, drinking this $20 bottle of wine, or just so that people can be buying your wines on a regular basis to be part of their day-to-day lifestyle instead of just a special event wine, unless you're fabulously wealthy and drinking $60 bottles every night. So I think that's part of it. Yeah, I think those are the two big parts of it. They're going to have to diversify portfolios in terms of the kinds of wines they're offering. They're going to have to figure out a way to combat the other options that are out there for people, whether that be abstinence or non-alcoholic beverages or whatever. Those are going to be the two biggest things to fight. But there's a third one that doesn't have anything to do with either of those. And that is, for the most part, Oregon is such a young wine industry. I mean, the Willamette Valley and some of these other regions have not been around as long as places like Bordeaux and Burgundy. So we're still young enough. There's people that have grown up with these wine regions, and you can't say that about too many wine regions in the world. And so there's a lot of wineries throughout the state where I look at them, and the winemakers and the winery owners are aging, and they're getting older. And I don't know that everybody has a succession plan. There's not always kids who can take over the winery, and so I think that we're going to start seeing that as an issue. Not every winery can do like Evesham Wood Winery did, for instance, where the owner of the winery was able to work out an arrangement so that his assistant winemaker, Aaron Nuccio, takes over to become the owner of the winery. I don't know that that's going to be feasible for everybody, but we've got a graying of the industry with winemakers and winery owners that are getting older and not always having children to take over. And so what is the next step? And some of the wineries I'm describing are some of my favorite wineries, and I'm sitting there going, geez, I hope they got a plan to get to the next level. So all of those things happening at once.
Yeah, do you think it's a matter of education too, where it's, training, education, building, excitement in the industry amongst younger people? I feel like that could be part of it. And, also kind of like more sort of cultural moments amongst, younger people that are kind of, creating that sort of enthusiasm.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a big part of and you see a lot of that going on in Oregon. It's really exciting. There's a lot of wineries that have figured out that walking into a tasting room, plunking down $20, getting 6 pours laid out in front of you, maybe you get a few descriptions from someone behind the bar, and then you maybe buy a bottle and you walk out the door. I mean, that's been the way it's been done for decades and decades. And after a while, that begins to get a little old and a little stale for some people. So you're seeing wineries in Oregon that have figured out that people are looking for an experience, that they're looking for something a little beyond just walking into the tasting room, plopping down money and tasting 6 wines and walking out. So you've got like wineries like Brooks Winery that are offering, they've got beautifully biodynamically farmed gardens. They offer all sorts of experiences in terms of tastings that you can come and do there. They do classes. They have Brooks University periodically where you can come in and attend a seminar on some aspect of wine. I attended one of those recently, and I was like really surprised to see a room filled with 30 people for a wine seminar down at Brooks University. So you've got people adding those little things on to the tasting experience. You've got Hayu Wine Farms, Hayu Wine Farm with Nate Reedy in the Columbia Gorge, where you've got a working farm and you've got a winery and you've got a chef and you have lunches and dinners where most of the ingredients have been sourced within 100 yards of the winery. So that includes orchard fruit, that includes proteins, all of that stuff. So it's more than just going out to a winery and going through a simple tasting. You can just have all of these additional things that can be done on top of it. There's a winery called Lucid Wild that's a relatively new winery in the Willamette Valley that I described it as Disneyland for adults because they intentionally created a winery space where there's at least a dozen different things you can do, and you can't possibly do them with every trip. So it'll keep bringing people back. Like they have, they'll throw you into a motorized cart and drive you down through a tour through the vineyards and get to the bottom and get to meet and greet the animals that they have on the farm. There's the visit to the honeybee hive. There's a secret speakeasy behind a hidden door in the building where they've got turntables where DJs can be spinning. They've got a aquarium built into the wall with moon jellyfish. They've got a game room that is to die for with foosball tables and whatnot. I mean, there's so much going on under one roof. And I think wineries are starting to figure out you just need to do some little extra thing to catch people's attention and to keep them coming back for more and more.
That sounds really fun. I'd like to check it out. I think we can leave it there.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the conversation today. This was great. Really appreciate your time, Michael.
All right. Good to see you in person. Thank you.
Well, that about covers it. And I am booking a trip to the Willamette Valley right now. Thanks for listening. You can email us comments and questions at podcast@wineenthusiast.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to your favorite shows. You can go to wineenthusiast.com/podcast for more episodes and transcripts. I'm Ryan Grimm. Thanks for listening.